Today I want to take a look at the three classes that I'll be teaching this upcoming spring semester, and that will be college arithmetic, which is some cases called fundamentals of math, the bottom of the stack, and then I'll be teaching elementary algebra, which is titled beginning algebra. It's the half of that middle book, and then statistics. So I'm going to take a look at these three books. I'll start with statistics. First book I'm going to look at is the statistics book. So I've taught out of this book before. This is with Pearson MyLab, and I've taught also statistics at different colleges where they use the ALEKS program, A-L-E-K-S, the ALEKS program. So I've taught both Pearson MyLab and the ALEKS program. I do like MyLab more. So this class does feature a emphasis on StatCrunch, since it is through Pearson, where ALEKS has their own type of program, but this is with StatCrunch. So I want to take a look at this book. I don't want to go super in depth, but I just want to look at the contents of what this class is going to cover for the semester. The first chapter is just data collection. Like the first two chapters are usually bulked together, is data collection and the actual descriptive statistics of visualizing it and understanding like the visuals with bar graphs, pie charts, like those kind of things. So then the first two chapters are typically bunched together. And then you actually, I like to call, when I teach this class, I like to call the beginning of statistics actually starting here. I like to say, all right, now we're actually going to do some analysis, do some actual calculations and everything, starting with chapter 3, when we get into that measures of central tendency and dispersion and getting understanding of what standard deviation is and just the terminology. A lot of people know what mean, median, mode are, but then standard deviation is where you take your knowledge of statistics to the next level and you really understand a little bit more in depth. And I know standard deviation isn't groundbreaking information with statistics, but a lot of people don't know about standard deviation or know what it actually means, and that's when we actually start doing some new things. And then we get into chapter 4, which I always enjoy chapter 4. Because you get into the correlation coefficients and understanding if you have some data, how can you make predictions off of that data? What can that do for us? How can we extrapolate to a population or just get an understanding of what this data is actually saying about the information? Very common example is real estate. If you're trying to sell a house, you look at the comparisons of the houses around, and then you could make a prediction on how much this house will cost. Based on its square footage, based off that all those other factors. So I really like that chapter because it really gets into understanding a little bit more of the impact that it has on everyday life with statistics, and you get into some of your more real world examples. Probability is another personal favorite of mine. With this class, it's pretty surface level probability. This is year 1 or year 2 of college, so this isn't getting into probability with calculus or anything like that. That's going to be on for later, but this class is typically for more of your non-STEM majors. So this is sometimes the end of the line type of class of this is the last math class I need for my major. So it doesn't go super crazy with probability. It does do a lot of cool problems with probability and get into really interesting scenarios. And I've taught at colleges that do section 5.5 here, the counting techniques. That's with permutations and combinations and factorials. But the first couple sections don't really cover that too much, but then 5.5 does. And that's when it gets very interesting and very difficult at times. Some students, that's where they really start to struggle, is with that section. Is a big struggle. And then you get into chapter 6 with the binomial probability distributions. This is another great one. And I like the connection between these two chapters, probability and discrete probability distributions. And then you got the normal probability with chapter 7. You could use the table, the table's in the back of this book, or you could use StatCrunch with the normal distribution. It kind of depends on what the class is offering and just the requirements there. Chapter 8, sampling distributions, and then chapter 9, estimating the value of a parameter. From chapter 8 to chapter 9, even into chapter 10, 9 and 10 is where the class starts to take a turn. That's where I think a lot of students start to really struggle with terminology, and especially when you get into hypothesis testing like that, that's always a very difficult concept for students, is getting into the hypothesis testing. And then it kind of starts here, but not so much. But this is where, especially at the end of a semester, you're doing this at the end, students are starting to burn out. And then you start to tack on, this is some of the more difficult concepts tacked on at the end of a class. And that's where they have to really dig deep and try to finish out the semester. There's a couple more sections here. And then we'll take a look at a couple things in the book. Inference on two population parameters, and then goodness of fit test. Okay, so this is the book. I don't want to go super crazy. I like this book a lot. I've been using it for quite some time. A lot of good problems in here. The answers, the answers to the odds for the student edition. This is the instructor edition, so I do have all the answers, but good examples. And then the thing I really like about this book is, let me find it. Within each section, sometimes it's labeled in the section, like right here. So technology step by step. At the end of every section, there's like a technology step by step where it tells you like, hey, if you have a TIA3, do it this. Minitab, do it that way. And then if you go to the next page, you got Excel, and then you got the StatCrunch directions. So it gives you all of the different ways of completing the problems given the different type of technology that you have. So that's really helpful. That is very, very helpful. And there's a lot, even within each section, there's a lot of like ways to help you out with technology too. I'm talking about it, but I can't find an example of it as I'm talking here. But there usually is like some technology help within each example. So yeah, this is statistics. Looking forward to this class. I love statistics. I love it. Oh, here it is. So in example 5 here, computing permutations. It gives you the problems, and then it tells you how to do it by hand, and then there's a tech approach, and then it gives you like a couple different options for tech, StatCrunch, Excel, TIA3. So even within the section, not just at the end, if they're giving you examples, they'll tell you how to do it also. Another one right there. So very helpful, very good. Next book is the College Arithmetic, or College Mathematics, as sometimes it's called, Fundamentals of Math. Another title I've heard. But this is by Elaine Martin Gay. Sorry, the stats book was by Sullivan. Sorry, I forgot to mention the author there. This is by Elaine Martin Gay. This is a really popular book. Same thing with the Sullivan stats book. Let's take a look at what we'd cover in this class. So this is your entry point into the college math system if you don't take like a placement exam, or if you just didn't do so great on the placement exam. This is the entry point. And this is where you would come in at. This is the start of the developmental track. So we start off with whole numbers, adding, subtracting, starting to get into some applications of parameter area, just understanding some key terms, multiplying, dividing, just really getting a strong foundation of adding and subtracting numbers with positives and negatives. And then you get into chapter 2, introduction of integers, adding, subtracting integers. And this is more just like understanding the process of like how do we add by columns, how do we multiply with columns, and so on. And this is actually getting into like the signs of like what happens if you do 2 plus a -5 or 5 minus a -7, like what does that happen there? So getting a strong foundation with that understanding. And then order of operations is just peppered within this whole entire book, because you'll see right here, section 1.9, exponents, square roots, and order of operations, and then it comes up again, section 2.6. What this does is it just keeps coming back to order of operations. Like, okay, now we know how to add and subtract integers. How do we do that with order of operations? So it's pretty cool. I like that kind of spiral concept of always coming back to the order of operations and connecting everything. Fractions. Chapter 3, fractions. Fractions is tough no matter what level of class you're in. That's is always something at the beginning of the next class I'll explain. You always start with fractions, and that's always something that's a little difficult at times for fractions. Decimals, just making sure we know how to add, subtract, and understanding decimals. The big emphasis with decimals is place value, like rounding and knowing round to the nearest tenth, round to the nearest hundredth. What does that mean? Those are things that a lot of people struggle with, and I know it may seem easy to add and subtract decimals, but then when you get into the rounding, that's where the struggle really happens that I've seen at least. Ratio and proportions. I like this section, this chapter a lot, especially with chapter 6 over here, percentages. I like the connections between these two chapters because I like the more word problem scenarios and the application scenarios that connect to the students a little bit more. That's where they're a little bit more engaged with the content when you get into that chapter 5 and 6. And then we stop here. We just stop at chapter 6. It's only a 3 credit hour class, so we don't go super far into it. But I like this book, though, if you're interested, because it does go all the way up to geometry. So it gives you some introduction to algebra. And this book is actually the old edition. This is the 4th edition. There's a updated version where this chapter is actually chapter 3, and then chapter 3 is chapter 4, chapter 4 is chapter 5, and then I think, if I remember correctly, but I know this is a little bit more heavy in the class that I'll be teaching because this is an old version of the book. Like, they completely rechanged the book around. So that the solving equations is a little bit more emphasis on the newer book, which is good. Solving equations should be, like, I didn't really know why it was like tacked on to the end here. I think solving equations should be moved up a little bit more. So they did rearrange that. And I know maybe it was chapter 2. I don't know, but it was changed around. Solving equations a little bit more relevant. So let's take a look at the book just for a couple minutes here. Not even a couple minutes, a couple seconds. Pretty good problems. Let's take a look at what an exercise section part looks like. So here are the exercises. So as I was saying, like subtracting, just subtracting by columns. Let's go to maybe, fractions. Let's look at fractions. Good problems here with applications, and then you even got some word problems here with like actual scenarios there. So that's good. And then you got LCD, a lot of good problems. Like this is, what are we at? Question 78 here at the bottom. What does this go up to? 100 on this page. Does it keep going? No, integrated review. So 100 problems just for one section alone, 100 problems. So that's really good. That is really useful, especially for this class. Like I always say to any class that I'm teaching, but if you're struggling with the concept, go home and practice. Practice, practice, practice. Just keep doing problems. And this book really allows you to just go home and do practice. Look at this. I just flipped to a random page, and then we got a whole page of just fractions. So go home, practice problems, just do them over and over and over again. That's what I always emphasize. Oh, this is a good problem. I like this problem here. These find the inner diameter problems, where you have to understand that we're trying to piece things together. We got this width, this length, the whole length. So how do we figure out from here to here? Good application question, really get an understanding of some terminology and work with fractions. So yep, that was Basic College Mathematics by Elaine Martin Gay. Last book here, it's Elaine Martin Gay again, and it's called Elementary Algebra, most colleges, but this book is beginning and intermediate algebra, so I'll be teaching the first half, which is elementary algebra, the beginning algebra part of it. Let's take a look at this. This is a great book. Love this book. I've taught both the intermediate algebra and the elementary algebra. So the elementary algebra side is the first 5.5, 6 chapters. Sometimes you'll go through chapter 5 and stop in the middle of chapter 6, or even go through chapter 6 in some cases. Depends on the school. But this is the first half. So we'll start off with, like I said, fractions. There's that fractions again, adding real numbers. So basically like a highlight reel of that previous class. This is the second level from that previous class that I just mentioned, that college arithmetic. It goes college arithmetic, then beginning algebra, then intermediate algebra. So this would be that next level up. So you pretty much do like a highlight reel of that previous class right here in chapter 1. And then even solving equations. So depending on your class, maybe you don't really go into solving equations, but like I said, the book has an updated version, so the solving equation is a little bit more relevant. So this is still a little bit some college arithmetic, a little bit harder, because then you get into problem solving, which we don't do in college arithmetic, but that's going to be looking at like application questions like distance equals rate times time, like that kind of stuff. That's usually a pretty big struggle. And then graphing. I always like to think of this class as this class hits 2 peaks. Chapter 2 is a peak in difficulty, and then it kind of bottoms out a little bit with graphing. Students typically do pretty well with graphing, and then it reaches another peak. Sorry, it's a little blurry as I'm flipping. It reaches another peak with chapter 4, because that's when we get into problem solving again. Like this typically goes okay, like these 3 sections of graphing, solving systems with graphing, substitution, and addition. And then we get into the 3 variable systems, which can be very difficult at times, but kind of depends on how deep you want to get into 3 variable systems. And then the problem solving is where that typically becomes an issue. So that's where I like to think of the class having 2 different peaks. Chapter 5 is definitely no picnic. This is a tough chapter, as I've learned over the years that this is something that it's kind of hard at the end of the semester to cover this chapter fully and have all the students feel like they've mastered that content, because you're kind of up to the end of the semester, so you don't have a lot of wiggle room left in your syllabus and a lot of wiggle room left with time. Like, you only have 2 or 3 weeks left and you have to get through these couple sections, so you can't just expand on more ideas as much as you'd want to. So this is something that I would want to just do a lot more time with if time wasn't an issue, which it is always, no matter what class you're teaching. But this is always something that this chapter is always something I wish I can spend more time on, but we don't necessarily have enough time. And then we get to some factoring here in chapter 6. So let's take a look at this book. This is probably one of my favorite textbooks. Like, I know on this channel I've talked about this. Ooh, cool. We opened it right to section 2.5. I've talked about this book before. I really like this book. I really like this class. I like intermediate algebra class. These problems are a lot of fun. Let's see. Yeah, it's a good example. So this is what I was saying. Like, so we reached a peak here with chapter 2, and this is what I mean. Like, these application questions, calculating length of a garden. So you have like a garden here, and then you have to understand like what formula to use. And then we have these, and then right at the beginning of this section, we have all the formulas that we'll need for this section. And there are some that aren't here, but if it's not in this little box here, they tell you like, hey, this is the formula that you should be taking a look at. So yeah, that's a lot of content, a lot of good stuff. And this is just solving for the variable. So that's another like literal equations of trying to solve for actual variables. Let's take a look at what the exercises look like in this section. Yeah, so you got a lot of problems. Let's see, all these application questions. How many questions? So we're at the 80 on the second page. And then it goes up to 90. 90 problems, amazing. Like, really amazing. Like, I'm not just saying like as a teacher, like, it's amazing that we have access to 90 problems. It's amazing that the author wrote 90 problems. Like, that's crazy. That's awesome. Like, you're able to write these 90 problems. I'd love to know that process, because that just seems like a difficult task, especially for something like this chapter here, where you have all these complicated application questions and you want the numbers to work out okay. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, so this is a really great book. Let's just open up to chapter 5. See what this is looking like here. Gives you little hints inside the book. So if you're looking to learn algebra, I would definitely start here with this book. So that's my spring 2025 schedule.